Ragnar Lothbrok has captivated the popular imagination as one of the most famous Vikings to have ever lived, or possibly never lived at all. His story looms large in medieval sagas, modern television adaptations, and countless retellings over a millennium. Yet historians still wrestle with a fundamental question. Was Ragnar a real flesh and blood individual, or was he a legend woven from the achievements of several Vikings? From the moment he entered into medieval literature, Ragnar was depicted as a warrior king of extraordinary prowess, forging a reputation that often defies simple classification. He's portrayed as the son of a Swedish king named Sigurd Ring, and as the father of several notable Vikings, including Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. These sons would, according to the sagas, go on to carve out kingdoms, launch invasions into Anglo-Saxon England, and become household names in their own right. Most of the details of Ragnar's life come from medieval sources, such as the Old Norse tale of Ragnar's sons and Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum. These tales include significant elements of myth and fantasy that can't be verified through contemporary records. One of the most famous narratives associated with Ragnar is his capture and death at the hands of the King of Northumbria in the mid-9th century. Medieval chronicles and later retellings claim that Ragnar led raids into the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, where he was ultimately defeated, captured, and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. Whether this gruesome execution actually happened is still disputed, but the story has become one of the best-known Viking legends. Some versions describe Ragnar, even while being bitten by serpents, defiantly reciting heroic poetry and prophesying vengeance from his sons. In addition to his Northumbrian exploits, Ragnar is also credited with launching a daring attack on Paris in 845. According to some accounts, he sailed up the River Seine with a Viking fleet and terrified the city into paying a large ransom. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, allegedly paid off the raiders to prevent further devastation. In verified historical records, a Viking leader named Reginharus, a Latinized form of Ragnar, is indeed mentioned as attacking Paris around this time. This lends some circumstantial evidence to the idea that Ragnar might have been more than just a legendary figure. However, the name Reginharus doesn't conclusively prove that he was the Ragnar of later saga fame. Scholars argue that several Viking leaders could have been confused or combined into a single legendary persona over the centuries, thereby creating the composite figure of Lothbrok. Despite the many variations and embellishments in the stories, common threads tend to appear. He's usually described as cunning, courageous, and brutal when necessary. Yet the medieval texts that mention him were written centuries after the events they describe. Grammaticus, for instance, composed the Gesta Danorum in the late 12th century, about 300 years or more after Ragnar's supposed lifetime. The Icelandic sagas that feature Ragnar were likely set down in writing around the 13th century, though experts agree they're almost certainly based upon well-established earlier traditions. This considerable time gap means that the stories had plenty of opportunity to evolve in oral tradition before ever being written, thus giving time for fact to blend with fiction. To understand why questions about Ragnar's historicity are so difficult to resolve, it helps to consider the broader context of Viking Age sources. The Vikings themselves often left behind no written histories or chronicles that modern scholars can rely on, in the same way they might consult Frankish or Anglo-Saxon texts. Instead, most of what we know about Viking expeditions, personalities, and achievements comes from chronicles written by their enemies, such as Anglo-Saxon or Frankish monks. Norse people themselves created little in the way of written records, with runestones being the only meaningful surviving records. These runestones, however, provide just brief tidbits of information, and many were raised with the explicit intent of bragging and self-promotion. These runestones often compared real people's actions to those of legendary figures, with it being seen as virtuous to claim to have accomplished something as great as a mythic heroic figure. Notably, the famous runestones found in Scandinavia often commemorate powerful individuals, but none explicitly mention Ragnar Lothbrok, or anyone who could match up with him. That said, this doesn't mean such runestones don't exist, or didn't exist at one point. Historians estimate that 90% of runestones that survived have been discovered. However, that still leaves numerous runestones which didn't survive and some which are still hidden away. Notably, many of the runestones which have survived come from the period where Scandinavia was being Christianized. Some have speculated that a runestone mentioning the exploits of an explicitly heathen king like Ragnar may have been destroyed by zealous converts centuries later. Given the nature of these varied sources, these accounts can be contradictory, romanticized, and of course, openly biased. Even the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of the more reliable sources for Viking activity in England, offers only brief mentions of particular raids or individuals. Beyond the written sources, archaeologists have tried to find evidence that might verify or refute the existence of a single person behind the legends. While excavations of Viking sites in Scandinavia and the British Isles have yielded incredible artifacts, none have directly confirmed the presence of a real Ragnar Lothbrok. It's important to note that the sagas themselves sometimes portray events that span different time frames and attribute them to a single hero figure. The Great Heathen Army's invasion of England in 865 is traditionally said to have been led by the sons of Ragnar, seeking vengeance for their father's death. Historically, we know that an army of considerable size did indeed arrive in England around that time, leading to the downfall of multiple Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. But it's not entirely certain whether this event was truly triggered by the sons of a singular Ragnar, or if the story was later romanticized to fit the heroic narrative of the sagas. Despite these historiographical challenges, the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok remains highly influential for a few key reasons. He embodies many of the traits that modern audiences associate with Vikings: bravery, seafaring expertise, fierce loyalty to kin, and a thirst for both adventure and wealth. While it's easy to focus on the violent aspects of Viking life, the sagas also highlight Ragnar's strategic ability and determination. The drama associated with his supposed death, being thrown into a pit of snakes, and his sons avenging him, ensure that the story remains memorable and captivating. Ragnar also serves as a convenient focal point in narratives that otherwise would be diffuse. His existence ties together various Viking campaigns in England, Ireland, and the Frankish territories under one mythic banner. So, is Ragnar Lothbrok the fearless Viking who sacked Paris, ravaged Northumbria, and fathered some of the most legendary Viking leaders of all time? Or is he a symbolic figure, a patchwork of legendary deeds attributed to multiple warlords, all woven into one grand saga? Realistically, we can't say with absolute certainty, though scholars generally believe the latter rather than the former. What we can say for sure is that someone carried out many of those raids, and these exploits significantly impacted the political landscape of medieval Europe. The land of Punt was a region of great mystery and allure in the northeastern reaches of Africa. Egyptian texts dating back to the earliest days of the Old Kingdom describe it as a source of precious commodities like gold, incense, ivory, ebony, exotic animals, and aromatic resins. Scholars generally agree that Punt was located somewhere along the Red Sea coastline, potentially encompassing parts of modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, and eastern Sudan. Although its precise borders have never been conclusively pinpointed, there's broad consensus that it included areas of the Horn of Africa, but I'll come back to this in a moment. First, let's explore some of the historical context about the Egyptian interactions with the land of Punt. This is a region that was strategically located for maritime trade routes linking Africa, the Middle East, and India. One of the earliest known references to the land of Punt appears in the Palermo Stone, an ancient Egyptian artifact that documents royal annals dating as far back as the 5th dynasty. The Palermo Stone is believed to have been created in the late 24th century BC, which, like everything with Egypt, really puts in perspective just how ancient its history is. These records suggest that the Egyptians sent expeditions to Punt to acquire valuable resources, most notably frankincense and myrrh. The fact that these coveted items were essential for religious ceremonies and for the embalming of the dead indicates how significant trade relations with Punt were to the Egyptians. The most famous expedition to Punt took place during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut in the 15th century. Extensive carvings at her mortuary temple vividly depict this grand voyage, which involved a fleet of ships sailing down the Red Sea, laden with valuable cargo acquired from the region. Interestingly, this discovery also provided indication as to just how advanced the ancient Egyptians' seafaring capabilities were. These images show that the people of Punt presented the Egyptians with gold, ebony, giraffes, monkeys, and large bundles of fragrant incense trees. Despite the detailed accounts of this expedition, identifying Punt's exact location remains a long-standing debate among scholars. Various theories have been proposed, ranging from placing Punt in modern-day Somalia and Eritrea to suggesting that it extended into parts of Ethiopia and Sudan. A minority of historians even speculated about Punt being situated in southern Arabia, although most evidence points to an African location based on the plants and animals referenced. The images of incense-bearing trees, giraffes, and other African wildlife strongly support the idea that Punt was located somewhere within the Horn of Africa region. Some have suggested that the kingdom of Punt could have occupied both sides of the Bab al-Mandeb Strait that separates Yemen from Africa. The distance across is about 15 miles, and generally doesn't require any degree of advanced navigational ability to cross easily. Archaeological evidence has also contributed pieces of the puzzle. Pollen analysis from ancient incense containers suggests that some of the species of plants mentioned in Egyptian texts are consistent with those found in the Horn of Africa. Additionally, descriptions of the Punt landscape, replete with lush vegetation, myrrh trees, and tropical habitats, align closely with certain areas in the Red Sea coastal plains. Nevertheless, until more definitive archaeological discoveries are made, the precise borders of Punt will continue to elude modern scholarship. Over time, references to the land of Punt grew significantly rarer, possibly due to shifting political alliances, changing trade routes, or the decline of certain dynasties. Egypt's power waned significantly following the downfall of the New Kingdom around 1070 BC, and economic ties with foreign regions became more complicated to maintain. Other trading powers, such as the Assyrians or emerging Arab traders, may have diverted or supplanted the pathways that once so reliably connected Egypt to Punt. By the late period of Egyptian history, running from the 7th century BC until the conquest by Alexander in 332, Egypt was largely under the rule of foreign powers, most notably the Persians. During this period, the land of Punt had largely receded into the mists of legend, though its legacy persisted in Egyptian lore. Upon Egypt's entry into the Hellenistic world, the legend of Punt made its way throughout the region. There were occasional references by Greek and Roman geographers who recounted stories of distant African lands filled with untold riches. However, unlike the Egyptians, neither the Greeks nor the Romans had direct access to this region. Notably, the autonomous region in northern Somalia has named itself Puntland after this region, though this is a modern naming convention intended to tie the region to the fabled land. The so-called Greek pyramids are an intriguing archaeological phenomenon, primarily located in the Argolid region of Greece. The most well-known of these is the Pyramid of Hellinikon, near the town of Elliniko. Unlike the impressive Egyptian pyramids, the Greek structures are far smaller and have an ambiguous purpose, leading to debates among archaeologists regarding their nature and function. The dating of these pyramids remains extremely controversial. Early investigations suggested they could have been constructed between 2500 and 2000 BC, overlapping with the period when Egyptian pyramids were being built. However, more modern dating techniques suggest they were constructed sometime in the first millennium BC, with some pinpointing the construction to the middle of the millennium. The Pyramid of Hellenikon's purpose is heavily disputed. Some theories suggest it was a tomb or mass grave, as was often implied by ancient sources like Pausanias, a Greek traveler who documented such monuments in the 2nd century AD. However, others have argued that the structure was more likely used as a small fortress or watchtower, potentially serving agricultural or defensive functions. This interpretation aligns with the internal design features, such as walls, cisterns, and water supplies, which are atypical for a purely funerary structure. The trapezoidal blocks used in the construction are reminiscent of other defensive structures from the classical period, and the small rooms and secured doors further indicate non-funerary use. The theory that the pyramids were related to Egyptian influence is largely unsupported by concrete evidence. Although some have speculated about the presence of Egyptian mercenaries or cultural exchange influencing these structures, the evidence does not convincingly support a direct connection. Instead, it appears that these Greek quote-unquote pyramids may have evolved from a localized Greek tradition, utilizing construction methods and purposes distinct from those of Egypt. Notably, many scholars dispute the usage of the term pyramid in relation to these structures at all, instead opting for the term fortified building. Further complicating the issue, the Greek Ministry of Culture has been hesitant to officially designate these structures as pyramids, instead referring to Hellinikon as a fortified building. The Kushite language was once widely spoken in the ancient kingdoms of Kush and Meroe, located in what is now Sudan, between roughly 800 BC and 400 AD. The Kushites were at the zenith of their power from 754 to 656 BC, when they invaded Egypt and established Egypt's 25th dynasty. Notably, the language is also commonly referred to in academic sources as Meroitic, after the kingdom of Meroe. It's believed that Kushite belongs to the Nilo-Saharan family, which includes various languages spoken across Central and Eastern Africa. However, confirming that classification has proven tricky, mainly because scholars can't fully translate the current body of Kushite texts. Francis Griffith made significant strides in deciphering the script in 1909. He identified certain phonetic values, but his work hasn't yielded a complete understanding of the vocabulary and grammar. Kushite scripts exist in two main forms, hieroglyphic and cursive, both of which share some visual similarities with Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yet, aside from superficial resemblance, they seem to function differently, with unique symbols representing distinct values. Our knowledge of Kushite is based on the roughly 1,300 inscriptions we've uncovered so far, many of which are short funerary texts or royal inscriptions. These inscriptions have been found on temples, stelae, and even personal items like jewelry. Though the texts are an invaluable resource, scholars struggle because of the limited variety of subject matter and the relative lack of extensive bilingual texts. Unlike the famous Rosetta Stone, which helped decode Egyptian hieroglyphs, By providing the same passage in multiple languages, there isn't a Kushite equivalent. There are a few inscriptions in Kushite and Greek side by side, but these typically only mention proper nouns and titles, which doesn't provide much insight into everyday vocabulary. The current status of our understanding of Kushite can be described as a partial breakthrough rather than a full decipherment. We're aware of some grammatical forms and can occasionally recognize names of deities, royal figures, and place names, but we still can't translate entire texts with confidence. Scholars from around the world continue to propose theories regarding the language's grammar, syntax, and lexicon. Excavations in Sudan sometimes yield additional inscriptions or artifacts, but it's rare to find something that radically alters our interpretive framework. With the rise of digital analysis in the humanities disciplines, researchers are using computational methods to compare Kushite with other languages in the Nilo-Saharan family. It's hoped that these methods may help crack the code and unlock our knowledge of this mysterious language. Berserkers were among the most fearsome figures of the Viking Age, occupying a unique place in Norse history. Though berserkers are widely known, their connection to magic rituals and shamanism is much less widely discussed. The word berserker is derived from an Old Norse term, which translates to bear shirt in English. This term reflects their close association with bear shamanism, as well as their practice of wearing animal pelts, generally those of bears, into battle. These warriors were famed for their ability to enter a trance-like state of unbridled rage, known as Berserker Gang, during combat. The Berserker Gang was characterized by a number of distinct traits: immense physical strength, a seeming immunity to pain, and an overwhelming aggression that struck terror into their enemies. In this state, berserkers were described as impervious to fire and iron, though these claims are often regarded as hyperbole or myth. However, some have suggested that this immunity described was psychological rather than physiological. Some historians suggest their trance-like fury may have been induced by consuming psychoactive substances such as mushrooms. This theory is contentious, but it aligns with shamanic practices found in various cultures, which often include altered states of consciousness to connect with the spiritual or animalistic world. Bear shamanism played a central role in the berserker's identity. In Norse mythology, the bear symbolized immense power, ferocity, and resilience, qualities berserkers sought to emulate. By wearing bear skins and adopting bear-like behaviors, these warriors aimed to embody the spirit of the bear, merging human and animal characteristics. It's been speculated that the initiation rituals for becoming a berserker may have included consuming the vital organs of a bear to acquire its essence. The process of transformation into a berserker likely involved elaborate rituals, though unfortunately, the records we have at present don't indicate conclusively what these were. These may have included chanting, rhythmic dancing, and fasting to prepare the warrior mentally and physically for the berserker gang. Some historical accounts describe berserkers as biting their shields or howling like animals before combat, further emphasizing their departure from human norms and alignment with animalistic fury.